They saw a dirty apron. They saw a nobody. But when the most dangerous man in New York walked into her restaurant, desperate and on the verge of losing everything, they learned the truth. She wasn't just serving tables. She was hiding a secret that was worth billions. And when she opened her mouth, she didn't just take his order. She took his breath away and silenced an entire room of elites. This is the story of how one sentence in a forgotten language changed everything. You won't believe who she really is. The crash of fine china against the marble floor sounded like a gunshot. The entire dining room of the Obsidian Room, Manhattan's most exclusive and pretentious restaurant, went silent. Elenya Vance froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. At her feet lay the shattered remains of a vintage porcelain plate and the filet mignon that had been destined for the mayor's table. "You clumsy, incompetent waste of space," the voice boomed across the room. Preston Sterling, the general manager of the restaurant, marched toward her. Preston was a man who wore suits that were too tight and cologne that was too strong. He treated the wealthy patrons like gods and his staff like insects. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," Elenya whispered, dropping to her knees to pick up the shards with her bare hands. A jagged piece sliced her thumb, but she didn't wince. She couldn't afford to wince. She needed this job. She needed the tips. Her rent in Queens was 3 days late, and her father's medical bills were sitting on her kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. "Leave it!" Preston hissed, kicking a piece of ceramic away. It skittered across the floor. "Get out of my sight, Elenya. Go to the back. If I see your face on the floor for the next hour, you're fired. Actually, consider yourself on your last strike. One more mistake, and you'll be begging for change on the street where you belong." Elenya kept her head down, her dark hair falling forward to hide the humiliation burning in her eyes. "Yes, sir." She retreated to the kitchen, the double doors swinging shut behind her, cutting off the murmurs of the elite. The kitchen was a chaotic inferno of steam and shouting chefs, but to Elenya, it was a sanctuary. She moved to the sink, running cold water over her bleeding thumb. "He's on a warpath tonight," said Sarah, a fellow waitress, passing by with a tray of champagne. "Don't let him get to you, Elle. You're the smartest person in this building. You shouldn't even be here." Elenya gave a weak smile. "Smart doesn't pay for dialysis, Sarah." It was true. Elenya Vance wasn't just a waitress. 5 years ago, she had been a prodigy. She had been on track to become one of the youngest linguistic analysts for the State Department. She spoke 6 languages fluently, understood the nuances of international trade, and had a memory that acted like a steel trap. But then, the scandal happened. Her father, a mid-level diplomat, had been framed for embezzlement he didn't commit. The legal fees bankrupted them. The shame destroyed his health. And Elenya had to drop out of Oxford, scrub her name from her resume to avoid the stigma, and take any job that paid cash. Now, she was a ghost. A highly educated, brilliant ghost serving wine to people who couldn't even spell sommelier. "Heads up!" a line cook shouted. "We have a VIP incoming. Code Black." The kitchen stopped. Code Black meant only one thing. A billionaire, a celebrity, or someone dangerous was walking in. Preston burst through the kitchen doors, his face pale and sweaty. "Listen up, you degenerates. We have a walk-in. Dmitry Volkov is here." A hush fell over the kitchen. Even the head chef looked nervous. Dmitry Volkov, the steel wolf of Moscow. He was a ruthless industrialist, a man who bought companies just to dismantle them for sport. Rumor had it, he was in New York to close a deal on rare earth minerals that would control the tech market for the next decade. "He is in a foul mood," Preston warned, adjusting his tie frantically. His interpreter called in sick, and he's apparently in the middle of a crisis. I need absolute perfection. Elenya! Elenya jumped. Yes, sir. You stay in the back. You're unpresentable. If Volkov sees a waitress with a bandaged thumb, he'll buy the building just to fire me. Stay hidden. Elenya nodded, stinging with the insult. She leaned against the cold stainless steel counter, pulling a small, battered book from her apron pocket. It was a collection of Tolstoy's short stories, in the original Russian. It was her only escape. But fate, it seemed, had other plans for the evening. 15 minutes later, the kitchen was in chaos. He hates the wine. Sarah came rushing back in, looking terrified. He sent back the Chateau Margaux. He's screaming into his phone in Russian, and nobody knows what he wants. He's slamming the table. Preston is shaking like a leaf, and the other guests are asking for their checks. What is he saying? The chef asked, wiping his brow. I don't know. It sounds like war, Sarah cried. He keeps pointing at the menu, and then at the phone. Preston thinks he wants the lobster, but he threw the napkin when we brought the butter. Preston stormed into the kitchen, looking like he was about to have a heart attack. I need someone to go out there and clear table 6. Sarah is too scared. Mark is on break. I need a body. His eyes landed on Elenya. You, he pointed. But you said, I don't care what I said, Preston shrieked. Go out there, pour the water, clear the rejected wine, and do not make eye contact. If you breathe too loud, you are done. Elenya took a deep breath, shoved her book deeper into her pocket, and grabbed a crystal pitcher of water. She smoothed her apron, checked the bandage on her thumb, and pushed through the double doors. The atmosphere in the dining room was suffocating. At the best table in the corner sat Dmitri Volkov. He was younger than the pictures in the magazine suggested, perhaps in his early 30s. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than Elenya's life earnings. His face was sharp, angular, with eyes the color of ice. He wasn't just angry, he was radiating a lethal, controlled fury. 2 massive bodyguards stood behind him, arms crossed. Elenya approached the table silently. Dmitri was speaking rapidly into a sleek black phone, his hand gripping a heavy whiskey glass, so hard his knuckles were white. Niet, ty nie poнимаешь, Dmitri barked into the phone. Jeśli oni nie podpiszут сегодня, my poteriam port v Odessa. No, you don't understand. If they don't sign today, we lose the port in Odessa. Elenya paused as she reached for his empty water glass. She understood every word. He wasn't just complaining about food. He was negotiating a hostile takeover of a shipping lane, and he was losing. The person on the other end of the line was clearly arguing. Dmitri slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Preston, standing a few feet away wringing his hands, flinched. Oni trebujut garantii w dolarach, Dmitri yelled. Skadzi im, что я не буду платить налоги дважды. They are demanding guarantees in dollars. Tell them I will not pay taxes twice. Elenya poured the water with a steady hand. She could hear the voice on the other end of the phone. It was faint, but her hearing was sharp. The person on the other line was misinterpreting Dmitri's instructions. They were telling the sellers that Dmitri was refusing to pay at all, not that he was refusing to pay the tax. It was a fatal error. If the translator on the other end said that, Dmitri would lose the deal within minutes. Dmitri listened to the response, and his face went pale with rage. He was about to hang up. He was about to walk away from a billion-dollar deal because of a mistranslation. Elenya knew she should stay silent. She was a waitress. She was garbage, according to Preston. But she looked at Dmitri's face, the desperation hidden behind the anger. It was the same desperation she saw in her father's eyes when the lawyers failed him. She couldn't help it. As she placed the pitcher down, she spoke. Her voice was low, calm, and perfectly accented. Gospodin Volkov, vash perevodchik oshibayetsia, she said softly in Russian. Mr. Volkov, your translator is mistaken. The entire table went still. The bodyguards tensed, their hands moving toward their jackets. Preston, who had been hovering nearby, looked like he had been struck by lightning. Dimitri slowly lowered the phone. He turned his head, his ice-blue eyes locking onto Elenia's. For a second, he didn't speak. He just looked at the waitress with the messy hair and the bandaged thumb. "Что ты сказала?" he whispered. "What did you say?" Preston lunged forward, grabbing Elenia's arm roughly. "I am so sorry, Mr. Volkov. This girl is mentally unstable. She is leaving right now. Elenia, get out!" "Let go of her," Dimitri said. He didn't shout, but the command was so absolute that Preston released her arm, as if it were red-hot iron. Dimitri ignored the manager. He looked at Elenia. "Continue, in English. So this idiot," he gestured to Preston, "knows why I am not firing you yet." Elenia stood straight. The fear was gone, replaced by the cool, analytical focus she used to have at the university. "Sir, the person on the phone told the sellers you are refusing to pay the principal amount. You said you wouldn't pay the tax twice. The nuance of the preposition was lost. If they hang up thinking you are insolvent, the contract voids at midnight." Dimitri's eyes narrowed. He lifted the phone back to his ear. "Andre," he said in English, his eyes never leaving Elenia. Ask them if they think I am refusing the tax or the capital." There was a pause. A long, agonizing silence. Preston was sweating so profusely it was dripping onto his collar. Elenia stood still, her hands clasped behind her back. Dimitri's expression shifted. The anger vanished, replaced by shock. "I see," he said into the phone. "Tell them I will cover the tax spread if they sign in 10 minutes. Da. Do it." He hung up the phone and placed it gently on the table. The silence in the restaurant was deafening. "Get me a chair," Dimitri said to his bodyguard. "Sir?" the bodyguard asked. "A chair. For her." Dimitri pointed at Elenia. "Mr. Volkov," Preston stammered, his face turning a sickly shade of purple. "Surely you are joking. She is staff. She is nobody. She broke a plate earlier. She is not suitable to sit with a man of your stature." Dimitri turned his gaze to Preston. "You manage a restaurant, correct? You sell food." Yes, sir. This woman," Dimitri gestured to Elenia, "just saved me $400 million in assets. In the last 30 seconds, she has generated more value than you, and this entire building will generate in 10 lifetimes. If she wants to sit, she sits. If she wants to fire you, she can do that too. Now, bring the chair." Preston scrambled to grab a velvet chair from a nearby table, sliding it behind Elenia. "Sit," Dimitri commanded. It wasn't a request. Elenia sat. She felt the eyes of every patron on her, the socialites, the bankers, the politicians, but she only looked at Dimitri. "What is your name?" he asked, leaning forward, studying her face like a puzzle he couldn't solve. "Elenia? Elenia Vance." "You are American, Elenia Vance." "I am. And yet you speak the dialect of St. Petersburg, not just the language, but the accent, the specific intonation of the old aristocracy." He swirled his whiskey. "Waitresses do not speak like that. Who are you really?" Elenia's throat went dry. She couldn't tell him about her father. She couldn't reveal her past. "I'm just someone who reads a lot, Mr. Volkov." Dimitri laughed, a short, dry sound. "Reads a lot. You corrected a complex contractual negation from a 3-second soundbite. You are lying to me, Elenia." He pulled a document from his inside jacket pocket. It was thick, stamped with "confidential" in red letters. He slid it across the table toward her. "Let's test this reading habit of yours," Dimitri said, his voice dropping to a challenge. "This is the addendum to the contract I just saved. It is in English. But the technical clauses are based on Russian maritime law. Read paragraph 4. Tell me where the trap is. Preston stepped forward again, unable to help himself. Mr. Volkov, this is highly irregular. She barely graduated high school for all we know. You cannot show her private documents. Silence! Dmitri slammed his hand down again. He looked at Elenya. Read it. Elenya looked at the paper. Her mind, starved for intellectual challenge for 5 years, woke up. She scanned the legalese. It was complex, intentionally confusing. It was designed to hide liability. She looked up after 20 seconds. Well? Dmitri asked. It's not in paragraph 4, Elenya said quietly. Dmitri raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. The trap, Elenya said, pointing a slender finger at the bottom of the page. It's not in paragraph 4. That's a distraction. The trap is in the indemnity clause, in paragraph 7. They define force majeure to include political sanctions. Since your assets are tied to the Northern Territories, if new sanctions are passed next week, which the Senate is rumored to be discussing, they can seize your ships without compensation. They are betting on you failing. Dmitri stared at her. His mouth opened slightly, then closed. He snatched the paper back, reading paragraph 7 furiously. He pulled out a gold pen, circled the clause, and swore softly in Russian. He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only a terrifying intensity. You are not a waitress, he said softly. Tonight I am, Elenya replied, standing up. I have other tables, Mr. Volkov, and Mr. Sterling will deduct my pay if I sit too long. She turned to leave, her heart racing. She had shown too much. She had made a mistake. Men like Dmitri Volkov didn't let mysteries go unsolved. Elenya, he called out. She stopped but didn't turn around. You finish your shift, he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. But do not think you are walking out of here and disappearing. You and I, we have business now. Elenya walked back to the kitchen, her legs trembling. As the door swung shut, she saw Preston staring at her with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. She had humiliated him. She had outshone him. And in the world of high-stakes service, that was more dangerous than breaking a plate. Preston pulled out his phone, his eyes fixed on Elenya's back. He wasn't calling a customer. He was dialing a number he hadn't used in a long time. Get me background on a girl, Preston whispered into his phone. Elenya Vance. I want to know everything. And I want to know what she's hiding. The next day, the air in the obsidian room felt heavier than usual. To the customers, it was just the scent of expensive truffle oil and aged mahogany. To Elenya, it smelled like a trap. She had spent the entire night staring at her ceiling, replaying the moment she had corrected Dmitri Volkov. It was a moment of weakness, a slip of the mask she had worn for 5 years. She should have let him lose the deal. She should have stayed invisible. When she clocked in at 4 p.m., the atmosphere in the staff locker room was chilly. Zara wouldn't meet her eyes. The sous-chef, usually friendly, turned his back when she walked in. Manager's office, Sarah whispered, as she brushed past Elenya, her voice trembling. Now, he's been waiting for you. Elenya's stomach dropped. She smoothed her apron, took a deep breath, and walked down the hallway to the mahogany door marked Preston Sterling, General Manager. She knocked. Enter, came the oily voice from inside. Preston was sitting behind his desk, leaning back in his leather chair. On the desk, sitting atop a pile of invoices, was a manila folder. It was thin, battered, and stamped with a logo Elenya hadn't seen in years. The Department of Justice. Elenya froze in the doorway. You wanted to see me, Mr. Sterling? Preston smiled, It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered a rabbit. He tapped the folder with a manicured fingernail. Elenya Vance, he mused. Or should I say, Elenya Vancroft, daughter of Richard Vancroft, the disgraced diplomat who embezzled $3 million from the relief fund in 2019. The room spun. Elenya gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. That's not true. He was framed. He never took a dime. Does it matter? Preston stood up, walking slowly around the desk. The court of public opinion convicted him long before the judge did. And you were the prodigy, the genius daughter who vanished. Everyone thought you went to Europe. But here you are, scraping gum off the bottom of my tables. What do you want, Preston? Elenya asked, her voice hardening. She was done being scared. The secret was out. I want compliance, Preston hissed, stepping into her personal space. You embarrassed me last night. You made me look incompetent in front of a billionaire. I don't like being embarrassed. He picked up the folder and dropped it back down with a thud. Here is the deal. You're going to work double shifts for the next month. You're going to take the worst tables, the tourists, the non-tippers, the complainers. And every cent of tips you make, you hand it to me. Consider it a silence tax, because if you don't, I call TMZ. I call the New York Post. Daughter of thief found serving burgers. Your father is sick, isn't he? How will his heart handle the paparazzi camping on his lawn again? Elenya felt a cold rage spreading through her chest. It was a low, dirty blow. Her father was fragile. Another scandal would kill him. You are a monster, she whispered. I am a businessman, Preston corrected, checking his watch. Now get out on the floor. Table 4 needs water. And smile, Elenya. You're working for me forever now. Elenya walked out of the office, her hands shaking. She felt like she was suffocating. She walked into the dining room, the noise of the clinking silverware sounding like chains. She picked up a pitcher of water, her vision blurry. She approached table 4. She didn't even look at the guests. She just poured. Careful, a deep voice rumbled. Elenya blinked. She had overfilled the glass. Water was spilling onto the tablecloth. I am so sorry, she gasped, grabbing a napkin to dab at the mess. Leave it. The voice was familiar. Terrifyingly familiar. Elenya looked up. Sitting at table 4 wasn't a tourist or a complainer. It was Dmitry Volkov. He was alone this time. No bodyguards, no phone. Just him, a bottle of sparkling water, and an empty chair opposite him. He was wearing a navy suit, his tie loosened, looking like a man who had been waiting for something interesting to happen. Mr. Volkov, Elenya breathed, I didn't know you were. I can get your server. I don't want a server, Dmitry said calmly. I want a consultant. Preston materialized out of nowhere, looking breathless and terrified. Mr. Volkov, we didn't know you were coming. I would have prepared the private room. And why is she here? Elenya, get back to the kitchen. Dmitry didn't look at Preston. He kept his eyes locked on Elenya. I am buying this restaurant. The silence that followed was absolute. Preston's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I am buying it, Dmitry repeated, bored. I made a call 10 minutes ago. The owner, Mr. Henderson, was very happy with my offer. He is faxing the paperwork to my lawyers now. Dmitry finally turned his head to look at Preston. The look was one of pure disgust. Which means, Dmitry continued, that as of 5 minutes ago, I am the owner, and you, Mr. Sterling, are trespassing. Trespassing? Preston squeaked. But I'm the general manager. Not anymore. You're fired. Dmitry waved his hand dismissively. Get out. If you are not out of the building in 60 seconds, I will have security throw you through the window. Preston looked around desperately. The staff were watching. The customers were watching. He turned red, then white. He looked at Elenya, his eyes full of venom, but he said nothing. He turned and ran toward his office to grab his things. Elenya stood there, the water pitcher still in her hand. "You bought a restaurant just to fire him?" "I bought a restaurant because the service was terrible, except for one employee," Dmitri said. He gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, Elenya." "I can't. I'm on the clock." "I own the clock," Dmitri said. "Sit. We have work to do." Elenya sat. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought he could hear it. "Why?" she asked. "Because I looked into you, Elenya Vancroft," Dmitri said softly. Elenya flinched. "So you know." "I know your father was framed. I know you were top of your class at Oxford. I know you have an IQ of 165. Dmitri leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And I know that the man who framed your father is the same man trying to destroy my company." Elenya's eyes went wide. "What?" "Mason Thorne," Dmitri said. The name hung in the air like smoke. "He is hosting a gala tonight, a charity event. He thinks he has won. He thinks he has destroyed your family and blocked my shipping lanes." Dmitri placed a small black box on the table. He slid it toward her. "I need a weapon, Elenya. I don't need a lawyer, and I don't need a spy. I need someone who understands language, leverage, and how to lie to a liar's face. I need you." Elenya looked at the box. "What is this?" "Your uniform for the evening," Dmitri said. "Go to the back. Take off that apron. Tonight, you are not a waitress. Tonight, you are my fiancé." The ride to the gala was silent. They sat in the back of Dmitri's armored Maybach, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Elenya felt like an imposter. She was wearing the contents of the black box and the garment bag Dmitri's assistant had brought, a floor-length gown of midnight blue silk that hugged her frame like a second skin, diamond drop earrings that were heavy and cold against her neck, and heels that added 3 inches to her height. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window. The waitress was gone. The tired woman worried about rent was gone. Staring back was a woman who looked dangerous. "You are shaking," Dmitri said. He was looking at a tablet, reading market reports, but he missed nothing. "I'm lying to a room full of sharks," Elenya replied, clasping her hands to stop the tremors. "And you want me to pretend to be your fiancé? They'll check. They'll know who I am." "Let them check," Dmitri said, swiping a page on his screen. "That is the point. Rumors are more powerful than facts. If they think I am marrying into the Vancroft family, even a disgraced one, they will wonder why. They will think I know something they don't. It will make them hesitant, and hesitation is all I need to crush them." He set the tablet down and turned to face her. The interior light of the car cast shadows across his sharp cheekbones. He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm, firm, and calloused. "Elenya, listen to me. Mason Thorne is a bully. He used your father as a scapegoat to cover up his own illegal arms dealings in the Balkans. He destroyed your life to save his stock price." Elenya felt a tear prick her eye. "I knew it. I knew he was innocent." "We are going to prove it," Dmitri promised. "But not with a lawsuit. We are going to make Thorne confess. Tonight." "How?" "Thorne has a weakness. He is arrogant. He loves to correct people. He loves to show off his intellect." Dmitri's eyes gleamed. "He has an encrypted ledger, a digital black book where he keeps the records of his real deals. He keeps the password on him, but not in writing. It's a riddle, a linguistic puzzle he uses to taunt his rivals. He thinks no one is smart enough to solve it." Dmitri squeezed her hand. "He hasn't met you." The car slowed to a halt. Outside, flashbulbs erupted like lightning. The red carpet of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was swarming with paparazzi. "Ready?" Dmitri asked. Elenya took a deep breath. She thought of Preston. She thought of her father sitting in his small apartment, coughing, staring at old photos of a life that was stolen from him. She squeezed Dmitri's hand back. "Let's go." The chauffeur opened the door. Dmitri stepped out first, buttoning his tuxedo jacket. He turned and offered his hand to Elenya. As she stepped out, the flashes went blindingly white. "Mr. Volkov. Mr. Volkov, who is she? Is it true you're buying the Port Authority? Look this way." Dmitri ignored them all. He placed a possessive hand on the small of Elenya's back and guided her up the stairs. The heat from his hand seeped through the silk of her dress. Inside, the great hall was transformed. Towering floral arrangements, an orchestra playing Mozart, and hundreds of people holding champagne flutes. It was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. As they entered, heads turned. The whisper started at the door and rippled through the room like a wave. "Dmitri Volkov is here, and he's not alone." "Keep your head up," Dmitri whispered in her ear, his breath tickling her skin. "You are better than them. Never forget that." A man detached himself from a group near the bar and walked towards them. He was in his 50s, silver-haired, with a tan that looked artificial and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was Mason Thorne. Elenya's heart slammed against her ribs. This was the man who had signed the documents that framed her father, the man who had taken their home, their reputation, their life. "Dmitri!" Thorne boomed, opening his arms as if welcoming an old friend. "I didn't think you'd show. I heard your stock took a tumble this morning." "Market corrections, Mason," Dmitri said smoothly, not accepting the hug. "They happen. I'd introduce you, but—" He paused, looking down at Elenya with a look of mock adoration. "I'm sure you remember the name Vancroft." Thorne stopped. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before plastering itself back on. He looked at Elenya, really looked at her, and his eyes narrowed. "Vancroft," Thorne said, his voice dropping an octave. "Richard's girl. I haven't seen you since the unpleasantness." "It's Elenya," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. She remembered Dmitri's advice, arrogance. "And the unpleasantness was entirely one-sided, Mr. Thorne. My father sends his regards. He's doing quite well, actually. Better than your tech division, from what I read in the Financial Times." Dmitri suppressed a smirk. Thorne's jaw tightened. "Is that so?" Thorne laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Well, it's brave of you to show your face in polite society. Or perhaps Dmitri is just engaging in some charity work." "She is my fiancée," Dmitri lied effortlessly, his voice loud enough for the surrounding circle to hear. A collective gasp went through the group. "And she is advising me on the acquisition of your company." Thorne's face turned red. "You can't acquire me, Volkov. My security is impenetrable. My ledgers are sealed." "Everything has a key, Mason," Dmitri said. "Not my key," Thorne sneered. He was baited. He tapped the side of his head. "My key is poetry, Dmitri. Ancient dead languages. Something a brute like you wouldn't understand. And certainly not a waitress." He knew. He had done his homework, too. Thorne leaned in, whispering so only they could hear. "The password to my kingdom is written in the foyer, carved in the stone archway above the coat check. It's in Aramaic, a riddle. If you can solve it, you can have my company. But since neither of you can read a dead language, enjoy the champagne." Thorne turned and walked away, laughing. Dmitri looked at Elenya. "Did you hear that?" Elenya was already looking toward the foyer. Her eyes were scanning the intricate stone carving above the archway. Most people thought it was just decoration. "I see it," Elenya whispered. "Can you read it?" Dmitri asked, the tension in his voice palpable. Elenya squinted. The script was ancient, a dialect of Aramaic used in the 4th century. She traced the shapes in the air with her finger. The hand gives what the eye cannot see, and the king falls when the servant speaks the truth. "It's not just a riddle," Elenya said, her mind racing. "It's a cipher. The letters correspond to numbers. It's a date." "What date?" "The date he framed my father," Elenya realized, her blood running cold. "He's so arrogant, he used the date of his crime as the password to his fortune." "Are you sure?" Dmitri asked. "I never forget a date," Elenya said. "August 14th, 2019. Dmitri pulled out his phone. He opened an app that looked like a standard calculator, but was actually a remote terminal connected to his hackers in Moscow. "Enter it," Dmitri commanded, handing her the phone. "Destroy him." Elenya's thumb hovered over the screen. This was it. Justice. Revenge. Redemption. But before she could press the numbers, a hand clamped down on her shoulder. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Vancroft," a voice whispered behind her. Elenya turned. Standing there was Preston Sterling. He was wearing a cheap tuxedo, sweating profusely, and holding a champagne flute. But his eyes were manic. "You think you won?" Preston hissed. "You think you can just get me fired and walk away with a billionaire?" "I made a call, Elenya, to the immigration office, about your mother." Elenya froze. Her mother had passed away years ago, but there were paperwork irregularities that had never been resolved. Irregularities that could posthumously freeze her father's pension, the only thing keeping him alive. "And," Preston continued, grinning, "I told Mr. Thorne you were coming. He's not using the Aramaic password tonight. He changed it 10 minutes ago. If you enter that date, it triggers a silent alarm. The police are already outside, waiting for corporate espionage." Elenya looked at the phone in her hand, then at Dmitri, then at Preston. She was trapped. If she entered the code, she went to jail. If she didn't, Thorne won, and Preston destroyed her father's pension. Dmitri stepped forward, his body shielding Elenya. "Get away from her, Preston." "No," Preston laughed. "She has to choose. Save her dad's money or save your deal, Volkov. She can't do both." Elenya looked at the keypad. She looked at Thorne across the room, raising a glass to her, mocking her. She closed her eyes. She thought of the patterns. Thorne was arrogant. He changed the password. Yes. But he was a narcissist. He wouldn't pick a random number. He would pick a number that celebrated him. She opened her eyes. She looked at Preston. "You're right, Preston," Elenya said softly. "I shouldn't enter the date." "Smart girl," Preston sneered. "I should enter the real password." Elenya's fingers flew across the screen. She didn't type the date of the crime. She typed the date of Thorne's birth, but translated into the numerical value of the Aramaic letters on the archway, a double cipher. She hit enter. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then, every phone in the room buzzed at once. The large screen behind the orchestra, which had been displaying charity logos, suddenly flickered. It went black. Then, giant red text appeared. "Access granted. File dump initiated." Thorne dropped his glass. It shattered on the floor. Dmitri looked at his phone. "We're in," he whispered, looking at Elenya with awe. "We have everything." Elenya turned to Preston, whose face had gone grey. "You were saying?" Elenya asked. But before Preston could answer, the doors burst open. Not the police, the FBI. But they weren't coming for Elenya. They were walking straight toward Mason Thorne. The ballroom descended into a chaotic symphony of shouting voices and camera shutters. Mason Thorne was not going quietly. As 2 FBI agents in windbreakers flanked him, gripping his arms, he thrashed like a wild animal caught in a snare. His face, usually a mask of composed arrogance, was twisted into a rictus of pure hatred. "You think this is over, Volkov?" Thorne screamed, spitting as he was dragged past the velvet ropes. "I have friends in Washington. I have judges in my pocket. You haven't won. You've just signed your death warrant." Dmitri didn't even blink. He took a sip of champagne, watching his rival being hauled away with the dispassionate interest of a man watching a bug being swept off a porch. "I think," Dmitri said, his voice cutting through the noise, "that your friends in Washington are currently too busy shredding their own documents to help you, Mason." Elenya stood frozen, the phone still clutching in her hand. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had done it. She had actually done it. The man who had destroyed her father's life was in handcuffs. Elenya. She turned. Preston Sterling was standing there. He wasn't running anymore. He looked small, deflated, like a balloon that had lost its air. The police were ignoring him. He was too insignificant to arrest yet, but he knew his life was over. Preston stammered, his eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. "I was just doing what I was told. You understand, right? Thorne, he pressured me. I'm a victim here too." Elenya looked at him. She remembered the way he had kicked the ceramic shards at her feet. She remembered the way he had mocked her father's illness. She remembered the silence tax. She stepped forward, the silk of her gown rustling softly. She towered over him in her heels. "You aren't a victim, Preston," she said, her voice ice cold. "You're a coward, and cowards don't get mercy." She turned to Dmitri. "He threatened to call immigration on my mother's closed file to freeze my father's pension. He tried to blackmail me." Dmitri's expression darkened. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to drop 10 degrees. He handed his champagne glass to a passing waiter and walked up to Preston until they were nose to nose. "Is this true?" Dmitri asked softly. Preston squeaked. "It was a negotiation tactic." "I see," Dmitri said. He pulled out his phone. "I am going to make a call, not to the police, to the Hotel and Restaurant Association of New York, London, and Paris. By the time I hang up, you will be blacklisted from every establishment that serves anything more expensive than a hot dog. You won't be a manager. You won't be a waiter. You won't even be a dishwasher. You are going to fade into nothing." Preston fell to his knees, sobbing, grabbing at Dmitri's pant leg. "Please, I have a mortgage." Dmitri stepped back, disgusted. "Security," he signaled. "Remove this trash from my sight." 2 burly guards hoisted Preston up by his armpits and dragged him out the back exit. His wails echoed until the doors slammed shut. "Come," Dmitri said, placing a hand on Elenya's lower back. "The air in here is stale." An hour later, they were in Dmitri's penthouse, 80 floors above the city. The view was breathtaking. Manhattan lay spread out like a grid of diamonds. But Elenya wasn't looking at the view. She was sitting on a white leather sofa, scrolling through the tablet Dmitri had given her. It contained the raw data dump from Thorne's server. It was a treasure trove of corruption, bribes, illegal dumping, offshore accounts. Her father's name was there, in a folder marked Scapegoats. It contained emails between Thorne and a corrupt judge, explicitly planning how to frame Richard Vancroft. "It's all here," Elenya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Every email, every wire transfer. He's going to prison for the rest of his life." "And your father will be exonerated," Dmitri said from the bar, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid. "I have already sent the relevant files to the Times and the district attorney. By tomorrow morning, Richard Vancroft will be a hero who was wrongly accused. He walked over and handed her a glass. To justice. Elenya took the glass, but she didn't drink. She looked at Dmitri. He had taken off his tuxedo jacket and unbuttoned his collar. He looked tired but triumphant. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why did you help me? You barely know me. You risked your deal, your reputation, for a waitress?" Dmitri swirled his drink, looking into the amber depths. "I told you, I saw potential. I saw someone who was being wasted." "Don't lie to me, Dmitri," Elenya said sharply. She set the glass down. "I just hacked a secure server in 3 minutes. I know when someone is hiding something. You knew who I was before I spoke Russian in the restaurant. You knew about my father before tonight." Dmitri went still. He looked up, his eyes unreadable. "You are smarter than I gave you credit for," he murmured. "I found a file," Elenya said, her voice trembling. She tapped the tablet screen. In Thorne's ledger, there was a transfer request dated 2 weeks ago. Sale of Vancroft debt to Volkov Industries. You bought my father's debt from the bank 2 weeks ago, before I waited on you. Before the restaurant. She stood up, anger flaring in her chest. You didn't come to the obsidian room for the food. You came for me. Dmitri sighed. He set his drink down and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "Yes," he admitted. "I was looking for you." "Why?" "Because I needed a way to get to Thorne," Dmitri said, his voice flat. "I knew Thorne had destroyed your father. I knew you were working in that restaurant. My plan was simple. I would buy your father's debt, corner you, and force you to help me interpret Thorne's old contracts. I was going to blackmail you, Elenya. Just like Preston did." Elenya felt like she had been slapped. She stepped back. "So this... tonight? The fiancé act? It was all just a manipulation." "It started that way." Dmitri turned to face her. "I came to the restaurant that night to offer you a deal, your father's freedom in exchange for your mind. But then..." He took a step toward her. "Then you dropped a plate," he said, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "And then you stood up for me. You corrected me. You looked me in the eye when everyone else was terrified. You weren't a pawn, Elenya. You were a queen hiding in a pawn's disguise." "So you didn't blackmail me?" Elenya said, her voice hard. "You just seduced me into doing it instead." "I didn't seduce you," Dmitri said, intense, closing the distance between them. "I respected you. That night at the restaurant, when you translated that call, I tore up the blackmail plan. I decided to ask you instead. Tonight wasn't manipulation, Elenya. It was a partnership. A partnership built on a lie," Elenya countered. "You own my father's debt. You own me." "No." Dmitri reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out to her. Elenya took it. It was the promissory note for her father's debt. $3 million, plus interest. At the bottom, across the signature line, was a thick black stamp. "Paid in full." "I paid it off this morning," Dmitri said quietly, "before I asked you to come to the gala. You owe me nothing. You are free." Elenya stared at the paper. The chains that had bound her family for 5 years were gone. Just like that. She looked up at Dmitri. He wasn't looking at her with the arrogance of a billionaire. He was looking at her with vulnerability. He had given up his leverage. He had given her everything, expecting nothing in return. "You're free," he repeated. "You can leave. You can go back to your father. You can finish your degree. You never have to see me again." Elenya looked at the door. Then she looked at the man standing before her, a man who lived in a world of sharks and wolves, but who had stopped to save a waitress. She dropped the paper on the table. And if I don't want to leave? She asked softly. The next morning, the headlines screamed the news. Billionaire Thorne arrested in charity gala raid. Diplomat Richard Vancroft cleared of all charges. Elenya sat at her father's small kitchen table in Queens. The sunlight was streaming through the yellowed curtains, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Her father, Richard, sat opposite her. He looked 10 years younger. The weight that had been crushing his shoulders was gone. He was reading the newspaper, weeping silently. They apologized, Richard said, his voice cracking. The State Department called. They offered me a full pension and a formal apology. He reached across the table and took Elenya's hand. You did this, Ellie. You saved us. We had help, Dad, Elenya said, stirring her coffee. She hadn't slept. Her mind was still in the penthouse, still feeling the ghost of Dmitri's touch. Mr. Volkov, Richard nodded. A dangerous man, from what I read. But he did a good thing. Did he ask for anything in return? No, Elenya said. He asked for nothing. She had left the penthouse at dawn. Dmitri hadn't stopped her. He had kissed her forehead and put her in a car. He respected her freedom too much to trap her. But now, sitting in the quiet safety of her old life, Elenya felt a strange emptiness. The silence of the apartment was deafening. She looked at her father. He was safe. He was happy. He would spend his days reading and gardening. But what about her? Was she supposed to go back to Oxford, to sit in a classroom and debate theory while men like Thorne and Volkov reshaped the world? Was she supposed to get a job at a library? She looked at her bandaged thumb. The cut from the broken plate was healing. Dad, Elenya said, standing up. I have to go. Go? Go where? I have one more negotiation to finish. The obsidian room was closed. The under new management sign hung in the window. The door was locked. Elenya didn't knock. She walked around to the alleyway, to the kitchen entrance she had used 1,000 times. She punched in the code. It hadn't been changed. The kitchen was dark and silent. The stainless steel counters gleamed in the dim light. It felt like a graveyard of her past life. She pushed through the double doors into the dining room. He was there. Dmitri was sitting at table 6, the same table where they had met. He was alone. No phone, no documents, just a glass of whiskey and a book. It was her book. The battered copy of Tolstoy she had left in the kitchen. He didn't look up when she approached. You forgot this, he said, turning a page. If everyone fought for their own convictions, there would be no war. Prince Andrei said that. He also said that war is not a courtesy, but the most horrible thing in life, Elenya replied, stopping at the edge of the table. Dmitri finally looked up. He looked tired. The armor was back on. The suit was perfect, the expression guarded. But his eyes betrayed him. They lit up when they saw her. I thought you would be on a plane to London by now, he said. I considered it, Elenya said. She pulled out the chair opposite him, the one he had forced Preston to bring her, and sat down uninvited. But I realized something. And what is that? I realized that I'm bored. Dmitri raised an eyebrow. Bored? You have your life back. You have peace. Peace is overrated, Elenya said. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. I spent 5 years being invisible, Dmitri, being safe. And then, for one night, I was alive. I was in the arena, and I found that I'm actually very good at it. Dmitri closed the book. He leaned forward too. The air between them crackled with electricity. So what are you proposing, Elenya? I don't want a job, she said firmly. I don't want to be your translator. I don't want to be your assistant. and I certainly don't want to be your fake fiancé again." "Then what?" "I want in," she said. "Volkov Industries has a vacancy in the Strategic Acquisitions Department. I know, because I read your internal org chart while I was hacking Thorn." Dmitri chuckled, a genuine, warm sound. "You want to run acquisitions?" "I want to lead it. You have the capital, Dmitri. You have the power. But you lack nuance. You almost lost the Odessa deal because you didn't understand the cultural subtext. You need someone who speaks the languages you don't. Not just Russian or English, but the language of people. The language of leverage." She reached across the table and took the whiskey glass from his hand. She took a sip, her eyes locking with his. "I want 10% equity in every deal I close. And I want this restaurant." Dmitri blinked. "The restaurant?" "I'm going to reopen it," Elenia said. "But not like this. No more snobbery. No more tyrants like Preston. It's going to be a place where deals are made. My headquarters. And the food will be excellent." Dmitri stared at her for a long moment. He looked at the determination in her jaw, the fire in her eyes. He realized that he hadn't just found a partner, he had found his equal, perhaps even his superior. 10% is high," he said, his voice low. "Standard is 5%. I saved you $400 million in my first 5 minutes of work," Elenia countered. 10% is a discount." Dmitri smiled. It was the smile of a man who had finally won the only game that mattered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gold pen. He slid a cocktail napkin across the table. "Write it down," he said. Elenia wrote the terms on the napkin. 10% equity. Full control of the Obsidian Room. Partner. She signed her name, Elenia Vancroft. She slid it back to him. Dmitri signed it without hesitation. He covered her hand with his. "One condition," he said. "Which is?" "Dinner. Tonight. Not as partners. As us." Elenia smiled. It was the first time she had truly smiled in 5 years. "I think I can fit you in," she said. "But I warn you, the service here is terrible." "I hear the new owner is fixing it," Dmitri said, standing up and offering her his hand. Elenia took it. She stood up, leaving the ghost of the waitress behind forever. She wasn't Elenia the victim anymore. She wasn't Elenia the prodigy. She was Elenia Vancroft, the woman who had brought a billionaire to his knees and then helped him stand back up. They walked out of the dining room together, not as master and servant, but as kings and queens of the city that lay waiting to be conquered. They say that information is power, but in a world of noise, the most dangerous weapon is the truth spoken at the right moment. Elenia didn't just save a deal. She reclaimed her destiny. She proved that no matter how far you fall, your value isn't defined by the apron you wear, but by the fire you carry inside. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and high-stakes justice, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. We drop new stories of underdogs taking over the world every single week. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a part. What would you have done in a